Hello YouTube and welcome to Aerofair Documentaries. Today we will be talking about the M4 Sherman tank and whether we think it was effective. So let's get on with it. First, you're going to need to know some of the specifics about the M4. The M4 Sherman was an American-built medium tank that was produced from 1942 to 1945 and used in World War II, the Korean War, the Greek Civil War, and the Six-Day War. It only cost about $1,025,423 US to produce, which was considered cheap. It was one of the most produced tanks of the war. There were an estimated 50,000 of them built, and they were used by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Okay, so now that we know what it is, what was its weaponry? The M4 Sherman had a 75mm main gun and two optional Browning M2 HB machine guns, one on the front of the hull and the other on the top of the turret. Along with this, it had an armor thickness of 12.7mm. This, along with a range of 100 to 150 miles and an average speed of about 26 miles per hour, this made it a pretty fearsome tank, at least for a while. You see, this is where we're going to start getting into the pros and cons of this tank. The first and probably most important feature about this tank was that it was super easy and cheap to produce compared to other tanks. This made it super simple to mass produce these tanks in large numbers. Secondly, it was super effective against first and second generation German tanks like the Panzer III and IV. However, the thing that really brought down the M4 Sherman tanks was the introduction of third generation German tanks. The Shermans were no match for the new Tiger and Panther tanks, which had improved armor and weapons. Now it's time to get into some of the more specific details of the M4 Sherman tank, with some special features that help make the tank unique. We've talked about how the M4 Sherman was super easy to produce, but why was that? At the beginning of production, the Sherman's hull was just one big casted piece of metal. This limited the size of the crew ports, making evacuating the vehicle problematic. The first major redesign, called the M4A2, changed this by making the hull out of multiple pieces that were welded together, which increased the size of the crew ports, but slightly reduced the strength of the overall armor. Surprisingly, this also increased the production speed of the tank. Now we're going to talk about one of the things that played a major role in making the tank effective, the volute spring suspension. This unique type of suspension was more of a coil rather than a spring. While wearing out much faster than normal tank suspension systems, it allowed for much more stable firing and was easily replaced and fixed. To make repairing and replacing this system even easier, its original vertical design was replaced with a horizontal version. Next, we have more details about the weapon systems of the M4 Sherman. As said earlier, it had a 75mm main gun, with its effectiveness and penetration decreasing severely with longer distances. The main gun fired a 13.9-pound armor-piercing round, and in some versions the main gun was upgraded to a 76mm gun. There was a machine gun attached to the front, and sometimes there was also one attached to the top of the turret. Along with the weapons, we also have some extra information on the armor of the M4 Sherman. It was, depending on the area, equipped with from 30mm to 76mm thick armor. Along with this, the M4 Sherman's frontal armor was sloped at 56 degrees, which helped it to take down many enemy vehicles without being destroyed. Although this armor was no good against rare German tanks such as the Tiger or Panther. The first battle the M4 Sherman fought in was under the British at the Second Battle of El Alamein. Both German and Allied tanks were lost in the battle, but it was a victory for the Allies, marking the beginning of the end for the Germans in Africa. After all that, I think it's only fitting to end the video with some fun facts and a tiny bit of extra information. During combat, the M4 Sherman was super easy to repair in general, but was vulnerable to rare tanks such as the Tiger. But since these tanks were almost always scarce in battle and usually traveled in small numbers, multiple Shermans could outnumber these tanks in certain scenarios. The Sherman's turret also had a bad habit of occasionally popping off the tank if hit. This was because of how the ammo was stored directly under the turret and would explode if hit correctly, making the turret fly into the air. This was partially fixed in a later design that stored the ammo in a safer part of the vehicle and added a water-like gel to the outside of the container, which would put out any fires if the box was hit. Overall, the M4 Sherman was a well-equipped and reliable tank that could fight well and only have a few battles that it couldn't win. Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Aerofair Documentaries. Hope to see you all next time.